Hello, ladies and gentlemen. It's time for part 3 of day 9, daily number 383, all about Liquid Hero and how we learn to be a better gamer. I want to re-emphasize what happened in parts 1 and 2 before jumping into part 3. The big theme that we discussed in part 2 was that Liquid Hero is doing all this crazy, fun, amazing harassment. However, it's so important to notice how long he's delaying that big core army. In a usual, let's just say a Terran versus Zerg, you'll see something like Blue Flame Hellions right back to Marine Tank, right? Or maybe Banshee Harass right back to Marine Tank. We get a little bit off track, we come right back to our core of Marine Tank. In this game, we see Hero doing, holy crap, he's going to be going like Colossus drop and Warp Prism harass, and then he's going to be doing Templar harass and Templar drops, and he's getting upgrades, he's going to be expanding and doing all sorts of stuff, and then at the very last minute, finally he comes back to getting a core army mix of just a lot of Zealots, Stalkers, those basic gateway units, some Immortals, some Templar for support. He's basically had only support units this whole game. And that's something that really excites me, because look at the way that the minimap looks right now. Liquid Hero has 4 bases. Historically, in this game, the last 20 minutes have been marked by Terran's complete and utter lack of aggression. Terran has been extremely uncomfortable moving out. If he did move out, he'd run into cannons, he'd run into feedbacks and storms galore. He has been running into that sort of stuff here at the front. And even though some of you might be saying, well, okay, well, in my PvTs, I can defend just fine, and I can get up another expansion, and I can be in good shape. However, not only does Hero have a 3rd base, he also has a 4th, he also has Templar, he's also managed to find time to get a full 10 gateways up. He's not as wickedly good at upgrades, but he's still at a reasonable level. Hero has set himself up brilliantly. He bought himself all sorts of time with the harassment that he's been doing. And it's been very, very good to him. And finally now we're going to see him get a 2nd forge. There he is going up. Yeah. And look, moving out again. Moving out with these small, tiny forces. This just looks like the riskiest thing I've ever seen. As it turns out, it is. It turns out there's nothing inaccurate about my statement. But be a little sensitive to what we just saw happen, right? Doesn't that look like a very sort of standard engagement, right? Moved up, completely got decimated. Come back and look at it one more time. This is the difference between Hero and everyone else. Let me talk about overt, blunt, obvious garbage. Obvious, blunt, clear, obvious stuff. Warp Prism drops. Terran can't deal with it. Has to defend. Warp Prism drop is a good way of aggression. Ha! Because I know many of you are thinking, I do not Warp Prism drop, and maybe I should Warp Prism drop. You see that there's a very clear difference between Warp Prism dropping and not Warp Prism dropping. Here is a subtle, not so obvious thing. Liquid Hero is advancing to this army. I want you just to look at this whole army. There's like so many health bars, it doesn't make any sense. We have a good number of Marines. We have about 25 Marines. We have, looks like we have a couple of Marauders hiding somewhere. 21 on the mini-map, but there's 20 there. Oh no, yeah, I guess that's fine. Ton of medevacs, some Vikings even, that make us wary of sending our observers in. But look at how this actually ends up turning out. You kind of forget that in a circumstance like this, the best foe sees this whole army. He can crush this, but he's got to be careful about these Templar. So even with this huge-ass army, this absolutely enormous Terran army, look at how much damage actually happens. He loses these units at the front. He's going to lose this Archon, the Templar that were part of that. And the rest of the army actually gets away pretty safely. So often, especially if you watch Liquid Hero versus EG's Puma from the NASL Grand Final, you'll see Hero move out, and you'll go, oh my god, there's no way that Hero's army could do any damage to Puma's army. And that's true. and Hero pretty regularly manages to escape with almost his entire army. It makes you realize that these subtle, aggressive move-outs are actually way more safe than you thought. Again, blunt, obvious ways to do harassment would be something like this warp prism that I seem to have lost track of. Yeah, this is an extremely obvious form of aggression. You either do it or you don't do it. This is a not so obvious form of aggression, just being willing to move out at these stages in the game. And I strongly suggest you move out, willing to retreat, but knowing that you're really not in that bad a shape. And even while all that attack was going on, look at the way Hero's army was spread out. Here was the main cluster of army with 2 Templar in it. Back home, 1, 2, 3 Templar. Look at the energy, 140 energy. He could have easily brought these into the army, but he didn't. In the main base, some Templar. Holy crap, we have some more Templar here. At the expansion, holy crap, we have a lot of Templar here. At this expansion, wow, we have another Templar there. On the map total, we have 16 High Templar. Yeah, you're starting to get excited with me? I'm getting excited. I'm starting to get how to play this matchup out. But what if he EMPs and snipes our Templar? Well, we have 50,000 of them. So I'm really not all that worried. Here comes the push. What can Terran do? He can EMP everything. Oh no, here comes another storm. Oh no, blinking back. Storming again. Snipes. Here's that warp prism with the Templar in it. Storming again. Storming again. Storming again. Hero ends up losing a couple of gateways. You know, it's just a little tragedy. Storm, storm, storm. Pushing it back. Pulling back. Aggression. Yeah. Really aggressive push forwards. Not a big army. Still pushing very, very ultra, super, supremely aggressively. Still able to blink out. Not huge amounts of stuff lost. Oh no, do you want to attack up here, best for you? I don't think so, dog. I do not think so. What about up here, where Hero's taking his 5th frickin' base, right? Obviously not, like, ultra guaranteed sorts of wins, but hey, with a Templar at every base, every single drop suddenly ends up taking a lot more damage. Thank goodness we have Warpin as an ability because it kicks ass. And now, very late in the game, starting to get that Colossus with range. I actually think we probably should have transitioned to that a smidge earlier, but we're still opting for Warp Prisms over Colossus. Small army, still willing to move out with it. We see that there's all these medevacs, you know, moving around the map. If we have a ton of units up here at the top left to defend it, then it means that, you know, our Terran army can't actually be that big. Hero's just kind of a genius at splitting up his armies and then rejoining them back together. And look at this, 2 of those Templar that had spent all their time defending that base. Well, let's bring them into battle, and then let's morph in 2 more High Templar here to defend back home. So suddenly, rather than having like 4 High Templar freshly morphed in for 4 storms and then immediately bluntly into 2 Archons, we have these like really high energy Templar. It's less of an ultra investment. If we get hit with an EMP, it's not the end of the world because we still have a storm on hand. This was I think, a very clear blunder miscontrol. But hey, here we go. Again, for most of... Let me actually pause back and go to here. For most of up to here in the game, what have we been talking about in part 3? We've been talking about this deferral of your main army, this delay of the main army. We talked about how freaking many Templar he has. So now we sort of are getting the sense that I can be sort of harassy, sort of aggressive, poking and prodding, and Terran's on the defense for a long time. And then we start getting our main army up. We start getting this up. Again, this is a period in time where Terran usually has the ball, as we'd put it. Terran is the one aggressively moving out in the map. Protoss is the one who has to be careful with the engagements. The Terran player is the one who can be moving aggressively forward. Again, you're noticing that historically, the Terran player is sort of like, oh, being careful, being careful, being careful. Moving forward right from about the 8-minute mark with drops and Marines and medevacs and doing all this stuff. And Protoss will only ever really push back with huge shoves. But again, we're seeing these Warp Prism drops completely change the tone of that. This is going to absolutely mess a Terran player up. And of course, usual good scouting of expansions. Ridiculous amount of Templar. Ridiculous. We've lost so many Templar. We still have 16 on the field. We don't actually have any units. No matter. We'll just storm this force that's trying to come up to snipe us off. We bring some of these other forces from the top. Yeah. Meanwhile, the main is taking damage. Here comes some more storms. More and more and more. If you can hit 2 or 3 big storms on these Marine Marauder clumps, it's not actually so difficult to deal with. The hard part is getting to the point where you have a lot of storms. And Hero did such an amazing job doing that. Gosh, getting 4 bases with 8 geysers up and running. And look, we still have 4 Templar here. We still have 1 Templar with full energy here. We have some more Templar around. Very sexy. Even though Hero is still behind on food, doesn't mean that he's actually in any real threatened position. He's still ripping up the main. Yeah, alright. A little bit of a flub here. Could defend this a smidge better. Also, Hero is a touch behind. Or was a touch behind in those upgrades right when it started. Haha, that's so awesome. And so suddenly notice what was once upon a time a really close, even battle, then went to the Terran being ahead in food. Suddenly is Terran on the verge of dying almost. He has no more medevacs. He has 1. Any stim is suddenly horrific. There's this weird teetering that kind of happens with the medevacs where once you get past a certain amount, your Marine Marauder army is wicked strong. But if you suddenly lose those medevacs, it's the exact opposite. It's wicked weak, I guess I would say. And kind of similar to the PvZ we saw out of Liquid Hero yesterday. You'll notice that Liquid Hero has really not done any sort of huge attack here. He hasn't really tried to barrel down the front door. He's harassed, dropped, then harassed, and now he's just going to park over center and try to just deny this from really being ever that operational. It's working. So good. He's good. What can I say? He's really quite good. And all these usual warpins all over the place. Obviously really good. And because we are Protoss in our production, abilities are better than the other 2 races. We can easily replenish. And by better I mean that if you're at 150 food and you have a big bank of money, you just build the units and they instantly pop out. So you can sort of maintain aggression and defend a little bit better with Protoss than you can with the other races. And look at that incredible storm defense. Amazing defending by Liquid Hero. This isn't Liquid Hero having to keep immediate tabs on the best foe-use army at all points in time. He's going cannons and Templar and all that jazz. And wherever the best goes, he shall be stormed, half to death, and then a giant army's going to roll in and kill him off. I don't really have that much more to say. I mean, Hero's just continuing to do the same stuff again and again and again and again. Taking a lot of bases. Would have liked to see this base go up a smidge earlier, because Templar up here with warping in on all angles is about equivalent to having that warp in at our main. And here comes the first really big attack of the game, and he still pulls back, and is just going to continue to starve his opponent. More Templaring. Good stuff. Start getting those questions ready, guys, because sooner or later, I'm going to be opening Markio's question grabber. What a lovely game. What an absolutely lovely game. I just thought that was fantastic. I'm going to go to markio.com/day9. Let's take your questions. F5, F5. I just love this daily. And again, I'd like to give an extra special shout out to Kennegat from TeamLiquid.net for providing me with these replays. He gave me some access to some exclusive private games of Liquid Heroes. This was one of them. And that's why I was like, cool. And I decided, of course, with his express permission to be able to do them on the daily. He allowed it, permitted it, and all sorts of good jazz. And we're going to be doing Liquid Hero again tomorrow. And then I'm hoping to do Liquid Xenio the following week. So pumped up. All right. All right. Here's a great question from The Alchemist 89. Would Hero's high harass, high tech style work against a Terran who opens with fast ghosts? Can Terran just not plow through if he decides to all in? Now that is one thing that I would need to do some exploration of. I don't claim to know how it feels if your opponent just immediately barrels down and tries to just hit you at the front. Here's my limited experience with this. One day in my Protoss vs. Terran, I generally prefer gateway units to Colossus. And I just, you always kind of end up getting the observer up because you need the detection in case he's going Banshees. And I just said, you know what, if he early expands, I'm just going to make myself get a Warp Prism and see what happens. I'm just going to give it a shot. And amazingly, it worked really well. Like these early expanding Terrans, you could never break the front, all this stuff. Suddenly, you just drop like 2 Zealots and a Stalker at the back of their base. They'd have to pull all the SCVs away. You'd get some good kills there. You'd lift up and you'd float away. And they couldn't really do anything because they didn't really have stim yet. And even if they did, you can just poach with the Stalker and then you can pull back with the Zealots and all that good stuff. Occasionally, in my experience, when a player would try to whip around and all-in me, I would just warp in a lot of sentries, force field, continue to do some really permanent damage-dealing harassment, force field, and then just engage in the army. It actually ended up being way easier than I thought. For this specific thing with the Colossus drop, I have no experience with it. It could be pretty easy. The one thing that pops to mind is that if we have speed warp prisms, or if we're just going for general harass, you can always just load the units back up and pull home. Don't go crazy with the harassment unless you know he can be committed there. For instance, if you see a guy moving all the way to your base, you wouldn't morph 4 DTs into his main, you'd morph 1 DT into his main. So against the fast ghost style, I feel that it would probably force the fast ghosting player to be a lot more defensive than he's used to, and would of course reveal that tech path and you'd have some time. War Prism Harass is amazingly good at delaying a Terran. For any of you Protosses out there, I want you to do the following. I want you to look at 5 games of your last Protoss vs. Terrans where you felt like the Terran was pretty good. I don't care if you're a Grandmaster, I don't care if you're Bronze. 5 games where you felt like the Terran was pretty good, and just write down when that first scary attack happens. If he moves out with 4 Marines and you crush it easily, ignore that. But write down when the first scary attack happens. And then play 5 Protoss vs. Terrans where you Warp Prism harass in some way, and write down the times when he ends up coming out at you. You will clearly see a huge difference. It'll actually end up being a lot bigger than you think, probably by 2 or 3 minutes, which is neat. Those are my thoughts on that. Cloudmage says, Dear Day 9, you were going to talk about why Hero was going to build Double Forge and then switch to a Twilight Council, but you never came back to it this. Can you please explain Hero's reasoning? I touched on it super briefly, but definitely did not give it that justifiable answer. When you're going for double upgrades, you're going to end up with a really beefy army that works well in direct engagements. But you can still get the double forge kinda anytime. The one thing that, I always end up feeling in the game is, I'm trying to get Templar, but man, I don't really feel like I have enough time. And that feeling I want to feel significant for you. So when Hero started to, was buying some serious time, he could get the Templar up. And I think that if he went Fast Forge, yeah, he probably would have gotten a really beefy, big army. And it would have been fine. There's nothing wrong with going Double Forge, 3 base, big army style. But by getting the Templar, he could get the 4th base up, and he could continue to harass. And stylistically, going for those Templar allowed him to get all those amazing things. So I like that. Another thing that I just want to say that's much shorter a description. If you're going Colossus harass, or if you're not going for that Colossus drop harass, you still could probably get yourself the double forge up. But if you are doing that really aggressive harass, you can get the double forge up, but now suddenly you can also get Templar up. Which one do you do? again, either one's fine, but you actually now have the opportunity to get those Templar up, which I like quite a bit. Let me see here. Let me see here. Let's take 2 more questions. Let us take 2 more questions. Yeah. Here we go. Some Terran from Terran 910. Day 9 with LiquidHerO's advantage with Warp Prism drop. What do you do when the map is unfavorable for such drops? Increasingly, all maps are really favorable for Warp Prism drops, like straight up. Maps with big distances between bases, these types of things. But it's almost like a spectrum. The better the Warp Prism drop play is, the worse that straight, big, direct army attacks will be. And the worse Warp Prism drops are, the better the big, straight, direct attacks will be. So, for instance, if you're on a map where Warp Prism harass, and there's these distances, and it doesn't seem, or the distances are really short, like Zelmaga Caverns, it's kind of awkward to do Warp Prism harass because it's kind of hard to float through the middle. Terran just kind of runs to your base. On a map like that, Warp Prism harass is still fine and good. Still pretty easy to do well with. Warp Prism actually just works well on most maps. But on a direct attack path map like that, just get Colossus with range quickly and just attack his front, and he will have an equally difficult time. If you're on a map like a Tal'Darim Altar or like a Antigua Shipyard, and you do direct attacks with your Colossus, you will feel that it'll feel harder. It'll feel like he can hit you at better angles. It'll feel scary to leave your base because the drops come in too aggressively, and they're too hard to whip back around, especially Tal'Darim Altar. If you ever walk out your front and get dropped at your back, your Colossi do not have a quick path home to defend you. So again, just I would suggest to you, try to do Warp Prism on every map, just to sort of get used to how it feels. But, if you're really struggling on the small maps, just go straight push. On the big maps, just go straight Warp Prisms kind of stuff. Let us take just another opponent. Just another opponent. Let me see. I'm reading through a lot of questions, but I'm really curious. Knuckles asks a question less about the overarching strategy and more about the specific tactic of the Colossus drop. Glad we got one of those in. Day 9, in terms of Colossus drop, what do you think about building an Immortal straight after the Colossus and dropping it when the Colossus has killed most of the Marines? Wouldn't it kill the Marauders and do further damage? And his question continued, but he ran out of characters, so got cut off. It's like Twitter, only 140 characters at a question. So, I'm going to say something, and then I'm going to immediately contradict myself. Perfect! So, in general, I'm always a little scared of thinking of all the ways to make the harassment right now be super ultra effective and maybe win the game. Because I like the idea of harassment letting you get to a next step. Right? Harassment then lets you get to here. Colossus drop lets me get to Templar. And then Templar harassment lets me get more expansions. It's that stepping forward thing. It's not like Colossus drop so that I can do more damage right now and my harassment's better right now and I can do it this way. I like that sort of next step-edness, because if for some reason your Colossus dies and your Immortal Harass doesn't do a very good follow-up, suddenly your next step isn't there, and you're just a two-basing Protoss who had a lot of potential. I want to contradict myself right away and say we saw Hero become really amazing by doing tactics like that. So I definitely think it's something that's worth practicing and considering. Rather than say whether it will be good or bad, because obviously I would need practice games to be able to give you that appropriate analysis. It's close enough that it's ambiguous. What I would say is what you would feel by getting those Immortals is that you would not have enough money to really get your third very quickly, and you'd be a little bit low on money even to do the Templar transition. You'll notice in that game when Hero was doing the Warp Prism Harass with the Colossus, he never really built any units. So he was just saving money, saving money, saving money, saving money. Built a Nexus, saving money, saving money. Twilight Council, saving money. Templar Archive, saving money. Zealot leg speed. And then, boom, a bunch of Zealots get warped in a moment of judgment. With an Immortal, on the other hand, you kind of have to decide to get the Immortal early on. You can't just, oh, boom, whip out an Immortal. So you have to decide to get it early on, so suddenly the Nexus is delayed, all the other things are delayed. So I'm feeling less great about it. And that's the end of the daily. Submit to me your Fun Day Monday replays to Monday at day9.tv. And by the way, I've been getting some amazing mech games from Complexity's Trimaster, from White Ross. Now we can do a little bit of investigation on that TVP mech stuff that was brought up in State of the Game. Ooh, I'm done. Thanks, guys. See ya, see ya, see ya. Well, actually, I would want to be you, because my God, you look beautiful today.